Hello, and welcome to episode 62 of Prose. This week, look at a future where men have no place, and embrace an epic ending in the final installment of Jack Lee's Ants of Fire, The Legend of Telo. Just so everyone knows, I am still pondering whether to stick with this long form or not. So as I have mentioned before now, feel free to chat with me through social media or by emailing the show directly at prosepodcast@gmail.com. Also, let me remind you all that if you've not yet followed the show on social media, please do so on any and all platforms under the name @prosepodcast. The best way to truly help the show, though, is by leaving a rating or review on Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, or on any podcast service. Ratings and reviews are what help others find this show. For easiest access, subscribe using whichever podcast catcher is your favorite. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tale, shall we? This week, we have Deleted in the final installment of Jack Lee's Ants of Fire, The Legend of Telo, Part 33, The Vow. Enjoy. Deleted, a short story by Jared I. McGee. If you are over 30, you will be deleted. Originally, it was nothing more than a phrase quite common to the National Dating Service's website. Women of all ages sought young, virile bucks that were in the primes of their lives. Therefore, anyone over 30 was unacceptable. Be she 18 or 80, if you're over 30, you will be deleted became a mantra of the dating world via the NDS. This wasn't all too terribly gauche or surprising. Anyone who's ever read a biology textbook knows that women hit their maturity markers in their prime at very different times than their male counterparts. After the first few years of this trend, the more overarching social constructs began to shift too. What was at first a sexual preference turned social movement became an overt methodology of thought. Jobs began to dry up for men over 30. Divorces predicated on irreconcilable differences, but actually about being aged out and retired from polite society and the marital systems and general usefulness spiked. The smutty and the integrity-obsessed journalists and news outlets alike declared it the age of the woman, and the joy by at least half the population was overt, as it was palpable. It only took 5 years for dating desires turned social movement to be parlayed into policy. The intrinsically male legislative bodies of the Confederation shifted their 95 to 5% ratio of men to women to their reciprocal. The age of the woman, indeed. A great many pundits and preachers and purveyors of what to think or what to feel heralded all of these changes as timely. For far too long had women been marginalized in this world. Everyone agreed on that. For far too long had the reins of political power rested in the men's hands, and look what they had done with it. Injustice and horror ran rampant in the world. It was hard to disagree with that line of thinking. When the same old power systems and players produce the same old results, maybe a dramatic change is what is needed in the world. That was the optimistic avenue of thought, for a brief moment anyway. As with all things, hatred followed very quickly on the coattails of welcome change and success. Misandry thrived, made all the more hungry from centuries of subjugation and otherness. Parental Solutions was flooded with genetic shifts. Everyone wanted to have baby girls. They were in vogue after all, plus, who would want to bring a male into this world? Luckily, the newest, chicest genetic marker testing could tell which way the fetus was leaning. With a bit of this protein and a shift of temperature, that little boy fiasco could be avoided for the mother-to-be. In the same vein, science was quickly making the need for a father to be obsolete, making the call for less men and more women even stronger and more viable. The process wasn't exactly ready for a full-on takeover just yet, but brave women in the Confederation's Institute for Reproductive Freedom were doggedly pursuing the right mix of genetic materials, chemicals, proteins, and binders that would allow women to finally have full rights to their reproductive lives. The stripping of the armed forces came quickly, too. The various branches were not dissolved immediately. Men just became less and less prominent as leaders, movers, and shakers. Their displacement came at a much quicker rate than anyone could have ever guessed possible. The zeitgeist of the time was just too powerful to deny, and the military, in all its testosterone drunken glory, did not see the rise of the woman as something that could reshape it. Before long, though, every ranking official and officer in all 6 branches of the armed forces was a woman. To ensure that this shift wouldn't immediately try to reverse itself, the higher-ups at the diplomatic office were women appointees as well. "My honor is loyalty to my sisters," became the motto when the 6 branches and the various Homeland Security/spy-heavy bureaus were joined together in one monolithic arm of the state. By that point, there were none left in the ranks of any of those institutions to push back against what was, by then, an inevitable tide, doing far more surging and very little ebbing. Even the initial demonstrations of restraint for cameras' sakes were abandoned relatively quickly. The UN condemned the flagrant and irrefutable discriminatory and sometimes violent policies. However, with similar movements spreading across the globe simultaneously, those condemnations evaporated within the first half-decade of the Great Balancing. That's what the entire thing began to be called. As early as 7 years in, textbooks began to refer to the major shifts in the nations as the Great Balancing, arguing that this drive toward a staunch matriarchy was a return to nature's way. It wasn't long before some of the more unabashed misandrists began preaching the genetic inferiority of men, hearkening back to some darker days, while also hinting at a darkening of the movement yet to come. Needless to say, not all women were pushing for the Great Balancing, but their calls to avoid complete marginalization of their male counterparts fell on deaf ears, in large part because those self-same women were steeped in, and actively taking part in, the NDS's campaign to ensure that only men between 16 and 25 were used for recreational coupling. All other forms of off-grid coupling and female-male relationships were discouraged, if not outright forbidden. Yet. Most guessed that another half to full decade would be all it took to get everyone on the same page with that, though. In the all-men's institutions that sprang up literally, far from, but figuratively alongside the all-women's institutions, they began to instill the 5-pillared mantra of what they deemed the Great Delusion. 1. All men were created equal, with women above them. 2. The Y chromosome is a defective X chromosome, therefore men must rely on women to make decisions. 3. History's greatest tragedies for the last 10,000 years have been perpetrated by men and men alone. 4. Men were deluded into thinking might makes right, but right makes might. 5. Male rule was the sole result of a mass hysteria and deluded fanaticism and zealotry driven by chauvinism and poor leadership. Those 5 pillars were repeated hourly in whatever lessons the boys and men were being taught on a given day. What few lessons there were, that is. Scrupulous repetition was always good for the weary soul. As for the promised deletions, those were on the docket to get underway sometime in the next voting cycle of the Confederation. What deletion really meant, the Confederation wasn't being very clear about. Until then, the NDS tried its best to filter out the pomposity and utter uselessness of the over 30 set for its esteemed sisters. Thank you for listening to Deleted. The musical track in the background of this story is from freemusicarchive.org. It is being used under a CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication License. Now, I have to beg of you all, if you have been listening to Ants of Fire, The Legend of Telo, the novel by Jack Lee we've all been experiencing together, stick around for our next offering here in this episode. It's the final chapter of the novel. If you have not been listening, then, well, you've got about 9 months to check up on. Alright, let's get over there and see what the ending to this epic fantasy will hold for us. Ants of Fire, The Legend of Telo. A novel by Jack Lee. Part 33. The Vow. Fael watched as the queen finished tracing her antennae through the writings and pictures on the wall of the cave. Her body shook as the queen finished the story of Telo and how the ants had built their new colony. Who drew this history on the wall? Fael said. Whenever an old queen relinquishes control of a colony, she enters a room like this and records all of the important events of her time as queen. You did this? Yes. I wanted to make sure that Telo's sacrifice was never forgotten. I held her body next to mine for a few days after she was gone, until my body was ready to lay eggs. I started writing while I waited for them to hatch. I wanted to get it recorded while everything was still so fresh in my mind. So, you are Queen Mara. I am. You recorded Telo's story even though she was not a queen? Like I said, child, she was special. Fael turned the colony's history over and over again in her mind. She still had questions that bothered her, that lingered. Mother, was Telo really an abomination? Or was she the nurse? Or what was she? I don't know. I just wrote down all that she told me. You know all of your children. You would have recognized her as the nurse. Do you think she suffered from the madness, truly? Do you think something happened to the egg and she lost herself? Mara took a long look at Fael. A clever smile reached across her face. Fael, I only know what Telo told me. And you believe her? You don't think it was the madness? You really think she was born that large and strong? I know what she told me, child. Well, what happened to the other colony? The colony that Telo encountered on her way to save you? Their purpose was to save us. They did not. That was their choice. Once our colony was strong enough to build an army, we scouted their nest, and we slaughtered them all to an ant. All of them? They were traitors. They were no different in my eyes than that drone. It says that the drone convinced our colony to execute our queens? Yes. If he is gone, why do we still engage in such a barbaric practice? I continued that practice to make sure that we were never in a position to be frightened again. I could not take the chance of another drone scaring the sisters with tales of few resources. I thought it better to keep this colony strong without the fear of having to compete with another colony. Are there few resources? I don't know. We've never starved. Our hunters and gatherers have never given me reports of there being any lack of game or vegetation. But after what happened before, I just couldn't take that chance with our colony. Well, I think that practice should end. That would be a mistake, child. You run the risk of competing colonies, war among family, just like last time. Vale felt a conviction in her heart. She vowed in her thoughts that the practice of killing her daughters would not continue, no matter the cost. I don't care if it's a mistake. I'm ending that practice. That will be my mission as queen, my legacy. You would run the risk of being enslaved again, of putting our colony in a position to be motivated by fear? No ant in my colony will ever go through what I went through today. I guess that will be your decision to make then. But first things first. Let me teach you how to read and write so that you can record your own memories when the time comes. My memories? Excuse me, memories is not the word I was looking for. Did you mean history? Yes, child. History. History it is. Thank you for listening to Ants of Fire, The Legend of Telo, Part 33, The Vow. And with that, dear listeners, we end an epic, epic journey with Telo and the Ants of Fire. This journey started on November 19th, 2017, and we have experienced some fantastic ups and downs together in the narrative of these ants' lives along the way, haven't we? Before I close things out for this week, I just need to take a moment to thank Jack Lee for allowing us to experience his novel. He and his characters have been a part of prose for 9 months now, and I, for one, will miss them. Just as a reminder, our guest novelist, Jack Lee, is from the American South. He enjoys clean water, fresh air, and tall trees. He writes when time and sanity allow. The musical tracks in the background of the story are from freemusicarchive.org. They are all being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. As we say farewell to these characters with whom we have been communing, and say farewell to each other for another 2 weeks, I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is always stranger than fiction. Thank you so much for listening.